Okay, welcome back or welcome to another episode of the Yogi Roth Show. I'm your host, Yogi Roth, and I'm fired up for today. I'm also fired up for our past guests as well. If you've missed anything, go to yogiroth.com, subscribe to the newsletter. I think you'll dig it. Try to kick it out every Saturday because that would be game day if this was the normal world, but it's a totally different world now. So maybe we talk a little bit football, at least via email. Speaking of talking, I am joined today by Ashley Adamson, my partner at the Pac-12 Network. So we get to talk all the time when there's games. We talk when there's not games, just not necessarily on air. But Ash, thanks for coming back to the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate you. Anytime. Any chance to catch up with you is a good one.
I like that. All right. So there's a lot going on in the world right now. We're talking about we got election coming up. We've got racial inequities all across this country, people using their platforms to talk about it. Pac-12 networks, we've just gone through a lot with our own little bubble with furloughs and layoffs. I don't know about you, but I needed like this last weekend just to like decompress. I didn't realize how stressed I was. Just because I think everything kind of builds up. So I want to start there with you. Like, how do you deal with conflict, and how did you learn that?
Man, that's a fascinating question, Yogi. And I'll try to keep it as succinct as I possibly can, because this could very quickly devolve into probably like a therapy session if I went there too hard. But so for people who don't know, and probably most of your listeners on this podcast maybe don't know too much about my background, but my parents got divorced when I was very young. I think I was about 2 years old. And because of that, I've realized this because of a lot of kind of soul searching and looking back, and, you know, when you try to think about what you're good at and what you're not good at and where it all comes from. First of all, it's really easy to blame all your stuff on your parents. And I know that's like a very, that's an obvious thing to do. But the reason that I bring up the fact that they were divorced and the way that has impacted how I've dealt with conflict is that I became this really big people pleaser. And so when I was with my mom, I was all about like whatever she needed, wanted, said, I was on board with. And yes, totally. Same thing with my dad. When I was with my dad, it was like his world, and yeah, mom's doesn't know what she's talking about. And yes, dad, you're right. And what kind of happened is, because I didn't like conflict, because there was enough of that going on, I just tried to be agreeable with whatever situation I was in. So I think it kind of started that way. And then, you know, as like it's not a gender thing or a whatever thing, or if your parents were divorced or not. I think I also had the thing where I wanted to be liked growing up in middle school. Like I switched schools when I was in 8th grade. I moved from Michigan to back to Denver with my mom. And so I was the new kid in class. And so, you know, some of those insecurities start to show up. So I say all of that to say that I have always been a little bit of a people pleaser. And it took me a really long time, probably within the last 3 or 4 years of my life, to step back and sort of realize that and identify that. And there are a lot of benefits to being a people pleaser. So it helps in a lot of relationships. There's people that I've become close to, and in moving around so many places. I mean, I've lived in 7 different cities in the last 15 years of my life. And when you are moving for a job, or you're moving to, you know, take on some new challenge, and you're getting to know people, you know, I just sort of became friends with whoever was in my circle through work or through whatever it was. So I think that, you know, it allowed me to really make a lot of deep connections with people that I wouldn't normally have made a connection with. But the other side of that is that you don't stand up for yourself that much, and you don't say, you know, name it and say what it is that you need or that you want. Or if you disagree, sometimes you have a hard time finding your voice. And so that was something that I kind of discovered a few years ago, that I did a lot of intentional work on, being able to speak up for myself more, to have more confidence, be able to, you know, it shows up in work a lot. I think being able to have the confidence to tell your bosses, your managers, your peers and colleagues, what it is that you think, and have confidence behind that. So I guess that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think the way that I deal with conflict now is a lot different than I used to. And I am just the biggest proponent of communication can cure all. And as long as I am communicating, whether it's in my personal relationships or my professional relationships, as long as I'm communicating, things typically go well. We're never always going to see eye to eye on everything, but I think as long as we can be honest and open with each other, that's been the biggest key for me. So being able to find comfort in honesty is something that I've worked pretty hard on the last few years, to be honest with you.
That might be the title of this, Finding Comfort in Honesty. We're coming off a weekend where a mentor of mine, Pete Carroll, was as honest as he's ever been with the media about whiteness in America, around racial inequities, around the role of a coach. And I think we're seeing that more. You and I sit in these really cool positions at the Pac-12 network where we talk to student athletes on and off the record, same with coaches. You've been in a lot of those worlds. Like, what have you noticed about the power of honesty in your craft now that you sit with your feet firmly on the ground saying, hey, you're going to go through adversity and conflict through communication and doing it honestly?
Yeah, I think we're in a moment. And I think the old, everybody says it, let's make sure this moment is a movement. And I think that it's gone beyond a moment. And I think that people are having these conversations in a deeper way than they've ever had before. I think they're having these conversations more openly than they've ever had before. And that to me is what is beautiful about 2020. There are a lot of things that are devastating to me about 2020, but that is one of the things. And I would say it even just from my own little world, the conversations that I've been able to have with some of our Black student athletes about their experiences and about the world and how different the world that they live in is different than the world that I live in. And you can know that at a high level growing up. I'm 38 years old. I think I understood it and see some of the issues that we have in our society from an early age. But I have had my eyes opened in a different way over the last 6 months. And it's hard for me to even admit that, Yogi, honestly. It really hit me like a ton of bricks of, what I thought my understanding was around racial inequality and systemic racism in the US and how it's experienced is different than what it actually is. And so I've just feel really grateful to the mostly young people who have been so gracious with me in teaching me, talking to me, opening my eyes to things and having, just a lot of patience with, they shouldn't have to explain it to me. But there have been some phenomenal student athletes who I've been able to connect with in a really meaningful way. And so I appreciate that. And what I want and what I think it needs to continue to happen is for just the world needs more empathy. Like we all do on every side of it. And so what I'm hoping is that there's so much fraction and there's so much division right now. And I don't know how we're going to get from there to where we all want to be, or even to heal, to get back to a place that doesn't feel so freaking heavy every day. Like, Yogi, I don't know about you, but I open up Twitter and I'm like, oh my God, like every single day there is something, it's just this really a barrage of heavy stuff. So I think, I don't even know if I'm answering your initial question, but I think that the difference that I've seen is that there is an opening and an honesty that now people are just having these conversations and it's part of our everyday existence. And that wasn't the case for a really long time. And so I hope that it continues. I trust and believe that it will. And I'm excited to be a part of, the process of making sure that it continues.
When you put a mic on and your earpiece in and you see the light go on, what do you think your role is being the host of the Pac-12 networks?
To be a hostess. I mean, honestly, I think to think of it as being a hostess, like you're coming to my party and I am so happy to have you here. And it is my job to make you feel comfortable, to make you feel informed, and to make you have fun. I think that's probably the most simple way that I could describe how I feel like what my role is as, a TV host. And every game, every situation, every role has a little bit of a different, flavor to it and meaning. But I think the biggest thing, and that's what I always think about, and, what is the saying? It is one of my favorite ones, and I have it written on my desk at the Pac-12, which, man, it feels like forever since I've been there. And I've got it, written all over my phone, but it's try to be focus more on being interested than interesting. Focus more on being interested than interesting. And to me, that applies not just to being in sports broadcasting. And I give that advice to every young broadcaster I work with. It's not about you. Like I'm telling you, as much as your Instagram page and Twitter will make you feel like it's about you, it is not about you. It's about the athletes and the coaches and the people that you're covering, and bringing them to fans and bringing their best out and getting some answers that are meaningful. And so when you focus on that and less about yourself, I don't need to prove to anybody about what I know. What I need to know is I need to have as much background information. I need to have done as much research as I possibly can, not so that I can say it, but so that I know the right questions to ask, and that I know the right follow-up questions to ask. So Joe Town, our good buddy, was was the person who kind of put that in my brain. And it's been one of my favorite sort of mantras to live by.
Yeah, I love that. Years ago, I was working for the Elite 11. It's a quarterback camp, for those that don't know. I've been doing it for 11, 12 years now. And Trent Dilfer, who's that coach, said to all the quarterbacks, you have to embrace your burden of influence. Meaning, if you play the quarterback position, your influence can influence the job of not only your coach, your coordinator, your quarterback coach, but also people answering the phone, the chef, the strength staff, the ticket office. Like, it truly influences everybody every snap. And I was like, wow, what a succinct way to put that on paper in front of somebody's eyes. Of, you have to embrace the burden of influence, and you either do or you don't, right? You either run from that. And I feel that way about a mic. Like, I feel like when we lava up, or Colin Cowherd does, or Clay Travis, right? Clearly he's not my kind of guy, right? If you know anything about me. But you have a burden. You have a responsibility to share truth, right? As you said, speak honestly. So I asked you that because I think it's really cool to hear from other people on air, and you and I obviously being as connected as we are, of like, what do you feel when you put it on? Because now, as you reference, like, it is a whole new world, and every show isn't going to be the heaviest show in the world. Like, we're going to have fun. We're going to goof off. I can't wait till we do that. But I think there's even greater recognition of responsibility, I think, now. So I guess the question is, and I'll say this with an example. Last night I'm scrolling through the internet or Instagram, and I see something amazing, this great story. And I'm like, at the very end, I'm like, I'm going to share this. And then I had a moment where I paused and I said, but is it true? Like, I don't know what's true, right? So I ask you, like, so again, like, how do you feel about that? Like, in your own craft, like, it's difficult to know the truth.
It is. And I think that's the hardest thing, that there's a beautiful, beautiful thing that the internet and social media has gifted us in terms of connectivity. And I want to tell a story at some point before we end this interview about that. So remind me. But it also is the biggest, fastest spreader of misinformation. And I think, you just watch it happen in real time. And it's hard to fact check something that you see on the internet. Like, there's a lot of different ways to manipulate videos and stories and all of the rest. People can make whatever they want up. And so, and we've talked about this, Yogi, before. I struggle a lot with, and part of it is that I just feel a little bit exhausted by it. But I struggle a lot with what and how often to share and post on social media. And part of it is that I know that's my job, and I want to amplify, share stories. Like, there's a part of me that it seems like kind of it should be easy as part of our job. But there's another part of me that just feels like it's another heavy thing to do. And if I post something, I need to make sure that I'm thinking about it in the right way before I post it. And I don't want to overshare, but also does anyone even really care? And so I just have gotten to this place where sometimes I kind of psych myself out, and I've pulled back from it a lot. I mean, I can't tell you, the number of original tweets that I've sent out in the last 6 months is lower than normal, I would say. And part of that is just because I've been trying to spend more time listening and learning and reading rather than espousing what I think. And not that there's a fine line for all of that, but I think for me and who I am at my core, I think right now in this moment that we're in, that I've been sort of more introverted and pulled back than being out in front of it. And it's interesting because I was talking to a former Cal student athlete, a football player, the other day, and we were talking about all this. And he said, I just implore you to understand that your voice really does matter. And don't think that it doesn't, because you can say something, and if somebody sees that Ashley said it, like, that might be helpful to somebody else. And he said it way more eloquent than that. But the point was I was so taken by it, because I just said, I really appreciate you saying that to me, because I hadn't thought of it that way. It was more that I didn't want it to be about me or try to like jump in, virtue signal and jump in and be part of this conversation that I'm just sort of really getting my eyes open to. But he said, no, it's the opposite. Like, you've got to say something, and don't overthink any of it. Just people know who you are, and people know where your heart is. And don't worry about that other stuff. Don't overthink it. So I think there is the influence of burden. It's a really interesting and I think spot on sentiment. And for people with a mic, and, we overuse the word platform all the time, but people with a platform, it does matter. And you can influence people, and what you say and do really does matter. Now, the other part of that, it matters what you say and do on social media. To me, it will always matter a lot more what you do in real life. And that is something that I think there's a lot of people who live two different lives, like the one that you see on social media and the one that they actually live. So that's probably a whole other podcast for another day.
That is a whole other podcast. But what isn't is you referenced student athletes that you talk to. I talk to a bunch as well. You also are not only an incredible host, but you're a great storyteller, period. You've taught a story class in college. You guide our features at the Pac-12 networks when we're up and rolling, and even when we're not up and rolling. You've done the Unlock series on the Pac-12 networks. People can go watch right now at pac-12.com. What like makes a good story?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of different types of stories, but in the end, a good story makes you feel something. And that is what story does. It connects us. And I think that is the beauty and the power of it. I can, tell you things all day long, Yogi. I can, it's the same thing with being a parent. Like, you can tell your kids stuff all day long about what they should do, shouldn't do, how they should feel or shouldn't feel, what's right and what's wrong. And the only ways that sometimes I feel like I break through to my 3-year-old is when I'm reading a book and there's some, moral of a story in the book. And it's like he pauses and we talk about it. And I'm like, I feel like you're kind of understanding something here that is very different than all the things that I think I'm trying to instill in you. And so it's been the way that we've connected with, humans have connected since the beginning of our existence. And there's a reason, hieroglyphics were found on the, walls of caves dating back to the very, very, very beginning, because people wanted to pass down story. And it's how we feel connected to each other. It's how I think we find empathy. And it's how we hopefully learn lessons and things. And it's everything that is about being a human experience is the heart of that is story. I believe that. So that's what anything that makes you feel is a good story. But I just think it's about being able to put people in other people's shoes. That's ultimately the biggest goal to me.
Yeah, that's so good. You're so succinct and paints a picture. So here we are on the 31st of August. This will come out probably the first day or two of September. The Pac-12 postponed football, as did the Big Ten. Two totally different stories, by the way. Yes. Feel way different things about those. What do you think?
We're teaching a PR class. I think it'd be good to use those as like kind of parallel.
Seriously.
Cases.
What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about the story of the 12 coaches, the 12 ADs, the 12 presidents and CEOs in this conference? You're in the middle of it. We both interviewed Commissioner Scott, the president of Oregon, Michael Schill, Ray Anderson, Dr. Doug Ackerman from Oregon State. But we told a story the day that it was postponed. What's your takeaway now, a couple weeks out, when the college football world is pretty much more dramatic than like my sister was when she was 13?
Yeah. As a former 13-year-old girl, I empathize with your sister and the addiction to drama. But yeah, Yogs, it's just nuts. Like, do you ever sit back and look around and be like, how the hell did we get here? Like, what is actually going on? I think back to March 11th, that last day of the Pac-12 men's basketball tournament, and we're in Vegas, and it just feels like we've been in a time warp ever since then. Like it's been hard for me to kind of wrap my head around everything that's happened. And I'm sure everybody feels that way, but as it pertains to the Pac-12 and how it all went down, to me, and I tried to tell this to everybody that I talked to, because everybody just obviously had the same reaction when we found out that the season was canceled, and people were upset and some were angry. Some were, why did it take them this long? I mean, it ran the gamut, but everybody was emotional. I mean, there wasn't one person that I talked to about it who didn't have some emotional investment tied up in it. And the thing that I kept coming back to was that it was always going to be about the medical advice. They put together a world-class staff of medical experts from the Pac-12, and they were always going to follow their recommendations, period, end of statement. And so, yeah, was it a little bit of a, they come out with the schedule and then 11 days later, we've got the season canceled? Like, yeah, that hurt my heart. Like I had gotten my hopes up that day when we finally saw the schedule and got to kind of dive into it and feel like we were going to talk some actual football. And then to kind of have the rug yanked out from under you, that it was a little bit disorienting. However, nothing changed in terms of, it was always going to be, they were going to follow the advice of the medical board. And the medical board said, we do not feel it is safe to proceed with full contact football and sports. And so that's like period, end of statement. And you can go through all the things that happened in between then. And we're going to learn more. And we're learning more every single day about this virus, and we're going to see what's going to happen. And I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts on what will happen if and when the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12 play. I mean, it's going to be wild to watch the next few months unfold. And if they do play, then I almost guarantee that there's going to be Pac-12 and Big 10 playing in the winter/spring. And what does that look like? And who's going to claim the national championship? I mean, it's just, it blows my mind. And there's going to be the most absurd, documentaries made about this in the years to come. But I don't know. It's been hard for me to wrap my head around it, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely an 8-part series, like 30 for 30 for sure. I don't know. I mean, I just sit here thinking now, and I'm like, okay, Auburn just came out with like 15 or 16 cases, COVID-19. Imagine there may be more. It's going to happen during the season. And I still sit there and I say, well, every other sport was postponed. Every sport is postponed for the most part, to my knowledge, in a lot of conferences as well, not just in the Big 10 and the Pac-12, except the one that's got like the most non-socially distant. Right. So you can't try to hide from the fact that like there's a lot involved in college football. There's money, there's power, there's so much, there's so many people that run it. Like who runs the SEC? You've got a fan base, you have Greg Sankey, you have ESPN, you have CBS, you have so many of the NCAA.
The presidents and provosts of the universities. Yeah.
So I just think that, and I hope what happens out of this chaos comes some clarity and some leadership, like some governing body to guide and lead. And it'll be interesting. I was listening to Oliver Luck talk about that the other day. And with the governing body also comes less power for the current governing bodies, which are the commissioners, the presidents. So it will be fun to watch. I'm trying just to roll with grace through it all, knowing that like my opinion may be able to offer some insight, some hopefully a little intellect, maybe a little influence, but it's not going to make the call. So just be connected to it and not let it weigh on me, because it's just, I don't know. That's not how I want to ride.
Roll with grace. That should be like the overarching theme and philosophy for 2020. If you can do that, if you can roll with grace in 2020, you're going to come out of this thing just fine. Because I'm with you. It's hard not to absorb it and let it weigh you down, because it's every single day. It's like, man, it's just nuts to think that we'd be talking. Somebody tweeted out, normally we'd be having, Jimmy Lake would be talking about the game against Michigan today. Like that's what we'd be at a press conference right now with Jimmy Lake. Like that is so depressing to me.
So depressing.
And at the same time, it's like, okay, here we are. It is going to be so much better whenever at some point in the future that we are going to be back in that world and that we are going to be talking about that stuff and soaking it in. It's like anything, when it gets taken away from you, you appreciate it more. And I don't think anybody has ever thought that college football was going to be taken away, but I certainly always thought I appreciated it, but I think I appreciate it way more than I ever did before.
JB Long texted me the other day, our mutual friend, the voice of the LA Rams. Love listening to him on Hard Knocks. He said, I don't think on our deathbeds we're going to be disappointed or regret spending more time with our kids with no college football season. As well as, it's not like we're grinding every day at the Pac-12 networks now based on all the changes that have happened. So I ask you, last couple of questions here, how do you wake up every day and how do you set your lens to move forward knowing there's no games, there's no press conference, but your work ethic's insane. You just described the amount of research you did, and we didn't go there. We'll go there later, but how do you do it? How do you operate?
Well, I would say that my research and work ethic is second to yours. So I take that as a high compliment coming from you, and I appreciate it. It's the only thing, pouring yourself into it and trying to figure out, okay, what do I have control of today? What can I get done today? What can I feel good about today? Whether it's crossing stuff off my list or whether it's connecting with people. I try to, and you've been an amazing support in this, Yogi, because we talk almost every single day, and you are one of those people that I do call when I'm feeling kind of disoriented and trying to figure out and make sense of what's ahead, because nobody knows. And the thing that I have tried to do, and I wouldn't say that I'm 100% successful at this, and this goes back to what JB Long texted you, and I think the sentiment that he texted you, that's the whole reason why, one of the biggest reasons why he's the godfather of my daughter. It's about being able to embrace, don't miss what we have right now. There's going to be a point that we go back and we're going to be traveling and we're going to be gone and we're going to be working crazy hours. And what I've really tried to do is I've never had a 8 to 5 job in my life. And I have that right now, for all intents and purposes. And so being able to be really present in the morning with my kids, to be able to be really present at night and on the weekends with them, and not turn on the TV, not get pulled away, not be thinking about work stuff. I have tried my hardest when I'm with them and with my husband to just be there totally. And when you don't feel like you're constantly missing something, because I'll tell you what, when we're in the midst of basketball season, that's the time that I feel like my head is on a freaking swivel, because you don't want to miss everything. There's so many games that they're happening all week long. You don't want to miss them. I'm following the men's and I'm following the women's, and it's just trying to absorb it all is a lot. And so I think what I'm really trying to do is remind myself that there's going to be a time that I am so grateful and that I'm going to miss this, being able to work from home, being able to, wear a hat and sweats for work, which is what I'm doing right now. So that's been, I'd say, the lens that I've tried to view it from, is just don't take it for granted, because we're not, as JB said, on our deathbed, we're not going to be like, man, I missed, the thing that I regret is that we didn't get that 2020 football season. That's not going to be it. That's not going to be what we're regretting.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think for me, it hit me this morning. We took a little staycation over the weekend, and I just, I referenced off the top, I just had to relax. My shoulders were tense.
Yeah.
I had to take the air out of them. And I woke up today and I was like, dude, I'm going to double down on the craft. I'm not going to put in 18-hour days like I would if it was the season, because there's no games. I can't watch any more of last year's film. I've watched every snap of every quarterback 3 times. Nothing else I could do there. But I can nuance the craft. And I still think of that quote of, bear the burden of influence. I still feel a great pride in that around a conference, even though we're not playing. And I know you do too, and we get to collectively kind of, tackle that together along with the rest of our colleagues. Right. And that's really fun. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to, when we get back to work, the phrase that I learned from a guy we both get coached by, Joe Town, he said, can you lift Mike or Ashley or Ted up off the desk? Can I lift you off the page if it was acting? Can I get you to pick your head up? What did you just say? That, to me, it's the nuancing. So I felt actually as bummed and disappointed and frustrated and sad and mad and all those things. I'm like, dude, I'm gonna go kick ass. I'm not gonna kick ass for 12 hours a day, but when I'm in it, I'm gonna be in it. And and look out, like coming out of it. That's just kind of where like, I'm like, okay, the brake's on. This is the decision I'm making. And I'm going down this other road.
And I can't imagine you making any other decision than that. Like, of course you are.
Wow.
And I love that. And I feed off of your energy. So I need it and I appreciate it. And yeah, I think what's going to happen is, everything, the old, my favorite Glennon Doyle quote that I'm sure that I've sent you before.
Oh yeah.
About, crisis means to sift, like let it all fall away and you'll be left with what matters, and what matters can't be taken away. I think so much about when you are in a really, really hard moment. And sometimes in life you look back and you're like, man, I didn't realize that I was kind of in it then, but looking back, whoa, I was. That's not this time. We all know, like everybody's in it. Everybody's feeling it. There's stress, there's financial stress, there's family stress, there's work stress, there's kid stress, like school stress. There's just so much of people trying to figure out what is next. And I think I just keep holding on to the fact that when you shake everything up and everything sort of falls away, that you are left with what matters. And so just pay attention to what that is and think about that. And don't let this moment that we're in, this year that we're in, just be a hard year and then go back to what your life was in 2021. I mean, even if we get to, let's say there's a vaccine and we figure it out and people can kind of get back to life as normal. I hope that we're not the same after 2020. There was a reason that this is all happening. And I think a lot of people are going to find new career paths. I think a lot of people are going to maybe realize and understand some things about relationships that they didn't before. There's just a lot of the raw truth is kind of breaking through to the surface, it feels like this year. And that is a scary and unsettling, but it's also a pretty beautiful thing. And the one quick story that I wanted to share that I alluded to earlier is we lost my grandmother, my 92-year-old grandmother, Mary Adamson, on a week ago on Sunday, August 23rd. She lived an amazing life. She was an incredible woman. I could do an entire hour-long podcast on the virtues of Mary Adamson because she was just incredible. No one, by the way, loved college football. She'd give you a run for your money, honestly, Yogi. She would. She's a Notre Dame fan. I'll mention that, but she just loved college football and college basketball as much as anyone in the world. When she passed away, it was devastating. She's been able to be out here for the last 2 years in San Francisco. She had been in Denver for the last 6 years of her life, and she was up for a new adventure and wanted to be near, my brother and I and our kids for her last few years. And so we got this wonderful gift of time with her. But the thing that I kind of realized she passed away 2 days before all of the layoffs and furloughs were announced at Pac-12. So last week was really heavy for a million reasons. But one of the things that the timing of her passing did for me was it just peeled back all the stuff. Like I couldn't even really think about or focus on what was going on at work because I was so sort of ensconced in making sure that I was there for my dad, there for my brother, trying to process what was going on. And then obviously the logistical stuff of going through all of her stuff. And as I'm going through all of the cards and letters and notes, and then to see the influx of phone calls and emails that I've received in the last week, what it did for me was it made me like really truly realize she never had a career. Her last job was when she was 18 years old. That was when she married my grandfather. She didn't have a career per se, but the number of people that she impacted in her lifetime and the number of friends that she had and the number of people who just adored her for who she was and the friendship that that she gave them. It's like the stuff that really matters. And so to me, it was just I told her, I was like, your timing actually was impeccable, Cramps, because I needed that reminder. It's really easy to get caught up in your job and your career and thinking that that's sort of what defines you. And in the end, there's so much more to it. So that was a beautiful reminder. But the story that I really did want to tell about Twitter is, and again, Twitter has been the downfall of a lot of things. And sometimes I just have to take the app off of my phone because it's too heavy. But the night that she passed away, my brother, Alex, who was closer to her than any of us, had asked her, can you please give me a sign? She was in hospice. So she had, she was home and on hospice for the last 3 days of her life. And he just said, when you pass, Grams, can you please just give us a sign that you're okay? And can it be something really specific? Like that time we were in Normandy and we went to Utah Beach, which is where my grandpa landed in the war. And we saw a rainbow and we knew he was there. Can you just make it something like super specific? And that night that she died, I couldn't sleep. I didn't, I was home, but my brother was with her, and I'm on Twitter and I'm looking, and this meteorologist, this local meteorologist in San Francisco, posted a picture and said, I got locked out of my office and I looked up and I couldn't be happier because this was what the sky looks like. And it was all these fires are going on in the Bay Area, as you know, and it was like a double fire rainbow across the entire Bay. And 2 minutes later was when my brother called me basically and told me that she had passed. And I told him, I said, did you see the rainbow earlier? I said, because it was probably about an hour earlier, this tweet that I was looking at. And he said, no. And I said, and I started looking up all these pictures. So I'm Googling like fire rainbow, San Francisco. And I found all these beautiful pictures of this rainbow from right about when my grandmother passed. And it was just, it gave me so much peace. And I thought, this is the first time in my life that Twitter gave me a beautiful, beautiful story and peace and a feeling of connection, and it's going to be okay. So I wanted to share that story because of all the things that I can feel when I'm on social media, and usually none of them are that positive. I haven't sent a note to the guy who I saw who posted it, but I'm going to, and just, it was a beautiful thing and a wonderful way for us to know that she was okay. And it was the exact specific sign that my brother wanted, and she was happy to oblige. So yeah, I just, not to get all sappy here at the end, but that was something that really meant a lot to me. And last week was a hell of a week, Yogs. But this week, everything, we're moving forward and figuring it out.
Per usual, mic drop. That's a beautiful story. And I know when people listen to it, they're going to have their own comparison to it, which, as you said earlier, a great story makes you feel something. So thanks for that. Thanks for the time. We'll do it again. We got no choice. Like, we're stuck with each other to a certain degree.
Exactly. And that's a good thing. But no, I'm excited. I love the way that you think about and ask questions. You're one of the best at it. And every time you ask me a question, it actually really, really makes me think. So that is a talent of yours. And I'd be happy to come on your podcast, The Yogi Roth Show, anytime, Yogs. You know that. All
right, there it is. Ashley Adamson. For all other content from Ashley, now follow her on Twitter if you don't, Adamson Ashley, as well as on Instagram. And if you need anything more on this podcast, go to yogiroth.com or just follow me on social at Yogi Roth. All right, as Ashley always says on our Pac-12 Perspective podcast, stay positive.